Hello and welcome to Podcast.init, the podcast about Python and the people who make it great. I would like to thank everyone who supports us on Patreon. Your contributions help to make the show sustainable. When you're ready to launch your next project, you'll need somewhere to deploy it, so you should check out Linode at www.podcastinit.com/Linode and get a $20 credit to try out their fast and reliable Linux virtual servers for running your app or experimenting with something that you hear about on the show. You can visit the site at www.podcastinit.com to subscribe to the show, sign up for the newsletter, read the show notes, and get in touch. To help other people find the show, please leave a review on iTunes or Google Play Music, tell your friends and coworkers, and share it on social media. Before we start the show, I have a couple of announcements to make. First, I started a new Slack channel for guests and listeners of the show, which you can find at www.podcastinit.com/Slack, where you can join in the conversation. Second, if you are interested in how open source powers innovations in data, then you should check out the Open Source Data Science Conference. It's coming to Boston, Massachusetts on March 3rd through the 5th, so don't miss out on your chance to level up and meet some new friends. Your host, as usual, is Tobias Macy, and today I'm interviewing David Winterbottom and Michael van Tellingen about the Oscar framework for building e-commerce applications in Django. So could you please introduce yourselves? David, how about you go first?
Sure. So I'm David Winterbottom. I've been a software engineer for about 10 years or something like that. So I work for a UK energy supplier at the moment called Octopus Energy, but I've worked for various other startups and agencies in London over the last 10 years. I mainly work in Python. I guess a small amount of Golang these days. And yeah.
And Michael, how about you?
Okay, hi, I'm Michael van Tellingen. So I live in the Netherlands. I'm a software engineer now professionally for also something like 10 years, I believe. Python also. Started with Perl a really long time ago and doing Python now for more than 10 years also. And I'm freelancing now since 2 years, I believe.
And David, do you remember how you first got introduced to Python?
Mainly working in PHP, as a lot of people do when you first get into kind of web programming. And I kind of learned a little bit of Python from going to conferences and following things on, Hacker News and that kind of thing. But I think the big point was, I was working for an agency and we were doing PHP projects, but we merged or acquired another agency who used Django exclusively for all their projects. So I can remember being increasingly jealous of kind of Django and Python's kind of functionality and what a kind of cleaner and nicer language it was than PHP. And so I think that's how I got into it. That's when I realised that I personally wanted to switch from primarily doing PHP to Python, but also I wanted the company I was working for to switch from primarily using PHP to using Python. So that's the journey I went through, which I think is quite a common one. Now that I recruit people for Python, a lot of people I speak to have been on the same trajectory when they started in PHP but moved over to Python once they got more exposure to it.
And Michael, how about you?
So I started Python, I think, 14, 15 years ago or something like. I used to do PHP, Perl actually mostly. Then I switched from company and they forced me to use Python. So there was a big switch from Perl to Python. Yeah, I love it, doing it ever since, and it's still my favorite language, mostly because you can just express what you want to do. So long time.
So can you guys describe what Oscar is and the problem that you're trying to solve when it was first created?
Sure. I think to be clear, I started Oscar in around 2010, but since I've changed jobs a few times, I haven't been that active with the project, probably for getting on for 2 years now or something like that. So let me talk about the start. So we're working in one of these agencies in London and we were doing lots of e-commerce projects for various clients of different sizes. And we wrote those projects in PHP using a kind of home-rolled framework, like an e-commerce framework and a kind of HTTP framework. And then we acquired this agency doing Django, and you can see what a great kind of process you could go through for doing a kind of relatively small-scale client project using Django. So Django lets you think about your data structures up front, your models in Django terminology. And if you get those right, and you can talk to your clients and that kind of thing to kind of iterate on them to get your kind of core data structures right, then so many things come out really nicely from that. Django will give you great support on building forms and all that kind of thing, and dashboards and list views and detail views and that kind of thing. And so what I wanted to do was to kind of transport our e-commerce experience into Django to take advantage of this kind of the framework effectively and all the things you've got with it. And so that's where Oscar started from. It was really a port of an internal package called Towshop. It took a while to kind of de-Towshop everything for Oscar over the years. So the problem, I guess, returning to the kind of question, the problem we were trying to solve with that was to write a framework for Django that was quite agnostic about what kind of e-commerce we were building. Because in my day job, we started off building kind of large-scale book sites where there'd be several million products, and you would have certain problems to solve in terms of handling all the stock updates and inventory updates from various kind of suppliers, digesting feeds and that kind of thing. So that was something you do one day, but the next day you might work on a very bespoke e-commerce site for, let's say, some kind of luxury product manufacturer. We worked for some people doing kind of car stereos and fancy speakers and this kind of thing, where the company might only actually sell 10 products in total, but every kind of product detail page is highly bespoke with kind of video content and all kinds of metadata around the product. And it's quite challenging to write a framework that solves both those problems at the same time. And we'd also had challenges around working in different countries and different kind of shipping rules and tax rules especially. And so, the core of Oscar was to write something which is agnostic about all these kind of decisions of the particular domain, but let you customize it in a kind of, as well as in an elegant way to model the domain you were trying to write a store for.
And to some extent, there's the question of, in some cases, wouldn't it have been easier to just write the different scales of e-commerce front ends at the time that they were needed, rather than trying to encompass the entirety of e-commerce in a single framework? But I'm wondering what the benefits are from having that degree of flexibility that allows you to encompass it all in that one project, so that you do have the core primitives available for each project that you're working on.
Yeah, I see what you mean. I think, in the kind of agency environment that we're working in, there's obviously strong pressure on delivering things very quickly, and having everyone across your developer teams, familiar with the same code base, the same approach. So there's advantages in having a kind of favoured in-house framework that everyone knows how the cart works, how delivery works, how you manage inventory, and understands the kind of mechanisms for customising it. So, yeah, you're right. In some sense, it would be perhaps advantageous to have a more start with a bit more of a blank slate, I guess, with each project and just kind of pull in certain components. But given the kind of tight deadlines and the need to be highly productive quickly, it made a lot of sense for us to have a framework that kind of tried at least to solve each, or at least was flexible enough to solve all of these problems. And it did work well for us. We did build lots of very disparate e-commerce stores based off based on Oscar, and we managed, we were successful in kind of bending Oscar to model each of those domains, even though they were quite different.
And you said that it was largely a port of an existing framework. I'm curious if the prior framework started out as a conscious attempt to build that core building block, or was it something that was just extracted from a number of different projects?
Yeah, no, that one was built to start with, it was built just to solve the problem of a big UK bookstore, with millions of products, and it was quite tightly coupled to the domain of bookstores, so it had kind of first-class entities, kind of authors and publishers, and the kind of things that you see in that domain. And so when we were trying to convert it to Oscar, we had to kind of take a step back and say, actually, it doesn't make sense for someone selling something totally different, like tickets for events, to have these things called authors and publishers knocking around in the system. So that's what I mean when we had to kind of divorce, when we were writing Oscar, we had to kind of separate out what was specific to Tellshop and these previous domains from what was truly core to most e-commerce stores.
And when you were doing that port to rewriting it with Django, was it done with the intent of open sourcing it, or was that something that was done after the fact, after you had already gotten it fairly functional?
It kind of happened by accident in a way, because I kind of just wanted to do it because I wanted to learn Django a lot better, and I wanted, I was frustrated with this PHP framework we were using. There were so many things that I knew weren't right, and I kind of just for my own pleasure, in a sense, wanted to write a better framework in Django. So I did it in my spare time. It wasn't sponsored by my company at that point, just in the very early days. And at that point, if you wanted to put put a project on GitHub, you had to pay for private ones, but you didn't for open source project ones, and so I didn't feel like paying for it, so I just I created it open source from day one, and that just kind of made sense. And when we got to the point of convincing my agency to use it, it was fairly easy to make the case for having it as an open source framework. I mean, that was sometimes a tricky challenge for some people completely unfamiliar with the world of open source. Will often kind of say, why are you giving this away for free, and why aren't we charging for, like an Oscar license or something like that? But that was a kind of argument we were able to win, because the actual benefits of being open source greatly outweighed whatever we could, the benefits that would have come to us if it had been closed or proprietary.
And briefly, where does the name come from?
Well, Oscar was one of my first kind of projects in Django, and I was under the impression at the time that all Django projects were named after jazz musicians. So it really comes after Oscar Peterson. But I then later realised that there was only like 3 out of several hundred Django packages that followed that convention. But, it's actually quite a nice name, Oscar. It's quite short and succinct, and it's worked well for us.
So, at face value, the idea of e-commerce seems fairly straightforward, because you're just, you have a product and you want people to pay for it, and then you need to deliver it. But behind that, there's lurking a lot of incidental complexity and domain-specific considerations for each particular company and how they manage selling their various products. I'm wondering, what are some of the most challenging aspects of building and managing a web store and a framework to power it?
Definitely the difficulty is writing a framework that handles all the different kind of stores you might want to build. I think this is brought sharply into focus for us at Tangent, the agency where I was, when we started doing kind of B2B stores, where they were kind of sites that were run by companies who were kind of selling, kind of products to other businesses. And so that things like tax suddenly become a lot more complicated then, and pricing. We had various problems like the store wanted to show a totally different price to different customers depending on what type of customer they were, and various other kind of criteria. And then how much tax they would pay would depend on all kinds of different things, like obviously what they bought, where they were shipping to, what type of customer they were. Sometimes they would be paying with some kind of internal gift card credit system, and the idea was if you ever paid for a product with that money, then technically the money it wasn't proper taxable transactions. You wouldn't pay tax on half the order, and kind of all kinds of complicated situations like that. And that's where some of the design in Oscar comes from, where we try and have we have this kind of layer where we, to work out the price of a product, or at least the price you show a particular customer, you can feed all different variables into that kind of layer about who the person is, what the product is, where they're trying to ship to, that kind of thing. I think that's an example of the kind of where things can get complicated quite quickly in terms of e-commerce stores. You're right that if you just take one particular instance of a store, then it's generally not that complicated. You just have to work out how are we going to manage inventory and stock, how are we going to pay for things, how are we going to fulfill and ship things and manage the pipeline once something's been shipped in terms of returns and refunds. But yeah, the more interesting problem is trying to write a framework that handles every possible fulfillment pipeline, if that makes sense.
So if I can comment on that. One of the first projects I did was for a big liquor store in the Netherlands. They had like 1,000 shops, just regular stores, and they wanted to sell it online. So we had to incorporate the new Oscar environment within the existing landscape. So you have like stock, but the stock can also be used by other shops. So we have to reserve stock. You have partial payments. You have customers with loyalty cards where you get discounts. So Oscar was a perfect fit for those kind of situations for us. Because e-commerce is actually one of the more complex applications you can build, I believe.
I just had something there, just reminded me. Another reason why we kind of picked Django to build Oscar in is because you get all these other great packages, which aren't anything to do with e-commerce, excuse me, but that you can mix into your Django project. So if you want a CMS, and basically every store I've ever worked on does need some kind of CMS, I didn't really want to have to build too much CMS functionality into Oscar because it's not kind of its core reason for being. But now, these days you can start a new Django project, you can install Oscar, then you can install Wagtail or Django CMS or some other of these kind of these good CMSs, and you get all this functionality which plays nicely together straight away. So that was another great advantage for us, for having it as a kind of an open source Django package. And actually, the other thing was, as Michael said, often people start with a CMS Django site and then realise they want to bring in some e-commerce functionality, they want to start selling things, and Oscar gives them a natural kind of pathway to do that. They don't have to throw away the whole Django site. They can kind of just bring in Oscar as a new package, and it should play nicely with your existing Django sites, because at the end of the day it is just like Wagtail and all these other Django apps that you can install. It's not fundamentally that different. One of the main issue you would probably have trying to marry several different Django applications is just who controls the kind of user object, if you know what I mean. The kind of main user that's used for authentication and logging in, because often a CMS and Oscar will have some idea of what a user is and what they behave like.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. That's one of the recurring themes that comes up a lot when talking about various Python projects, is that the power that the ecosystem brings is one of the main reasons for initially starting a project in Python or using one of the Python frameworks like Django, because of the fact that you don't have to write everything. You can just focus on the core differentiator that you need to deal with, and then you can rely on the great work that so many other contributors have made before you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And one of the other sort of main e-commerce libraries or frameworks that I'm familiar with is Spree-commerce in Rails. I'm wondering if you're familiar with it, and if so, if you can give a brief comparison between Spree and Oscar.
I'm aware of it, but I'm really not that familiar with it enough to give a comparison with it, I'm afraid. I don't know if you are, Michael.
No. I know when I started using Oscar, there was a consideration between Magento and Oscar, and of course the more commercial offerings like Hubris and stuff like that. But I never, Oscar was actually my first e-commerce project framework. Okay. Not really familiar with Spree. I know there are a lot of new Django frameworks coming up these days. I believe Cellular is pretty active also.
That's right.
But they take another approach than Oscar, I believe. Well, I think Cellular is not really trying to be a framework, but more like you just fork it and you customize it or something like that.
That's right. Cellular is actually written by some people that I used to work with on an Oscar project. So that is written by an agency in Poland called Mirami, and they came to work with us at Tangent on some of our we did some big e-commerce stores in India 1 year, and they came and worked with us on those. So they worked, and that Oscar was only kind of version 0.1, 0.2 then. So Patrick and some of the other people at Mirami have committed quite a lot to Oscar, but then of course they were doing their own e-commerce platform at the same time, which, as you say, takes a slightly different approach to how Oscar does things.
And is there a particular size or scale of e-commerce site that would make sense to bring in Oscar, or do you think that it fits equally well from the small to the large scale?
Well, I think for very straightforward e-commerce, where there's nothing unusual about it. I mean, my knowledge is a little bit stale here. I'm talking about how I did things 2 years ago. Then Shopify was always a good fit for that kind of problem. If you're just trying to sell some t-shirts as just a side thing to go alongside your main business, then something straightforward like Shopify worked quite well. That's not really the end of the market that Oscar was trying to address. So Oscar was trying to find this part of the market where people had non-obvious or complicated things within their domain that they wanted to model elegantly or just accurately even. And so as soon as you had some kind of subtlety around shipping or tax or inventory management, it doesn't take long to break out of what you can do within something like Shopify, where you don't get to change the source code. Then Oscar is a good fit for that kind of part of the market. As an agency, we've struggled a little bit in terms of winning pitches for the real high end of the market, where people have got multi-million pound budgets, just against kind of more established proprietary software, like Hybris, I think was one, and maybe some of the SAP sponsored product. Actually, I think maybe Hybris did become part of SAP. But that's not really an objective comparison between software. That's more about kind of business and support and enterprise and that kind of thing.
And to add to that, I believe Oscar's really strength is that most e-commerce environments I built actually don't use the product information system in Oscar, but import it from another system, and the orders are handled by another system. So Oscar is more like the front end for an existing landscape, and I think Oscar really fits well there because it's so pluggable in other solutions already. And I think if you have a small shop, then you do your product management, do your in the e-commerce framework, or the order handling you do also in the same framework. But for the bigger shops, it's just all separate entities who do that stuff. So I think that's the real strength of Oscar.
One of the main points that's illustrated in the documentation is the fact that Oscar has a domain-driven approach to building e-commerce applications. Could you guys explain a bit what that means and how it's manifested in the project?
Sure. I think I probably wrote most of those phrases in the docs. You feel that one. So, my background for becoming a software engineer was in kind of mathematics, and I was worked a lot in kind of mathematical modelling. So one thing I was always keen on in software, or at least enjoyed, was the aspect of accurately modelling a particular domain and mapping it into software. And this means kind of getting your data structures right and your layers and how information flows between them. That's always the bit of software engineering that I've enjoyed. And so and at the time I was reading lots of programming books. And one of the books that stuck with me a lot was Eric Evans's Domain-Driven Design. Now, in Oscar, what I mean when I say it's domain-driven is that because it's very flexible and it lets you change the core data structures. If you have orders that need, particular fields that, map to your domain, like in the book world, like publishers and authors and bindings and that kind of thing, then you can actually change your models to have fields that accurately capture, actually accurately model the domain you're talking about. Now, this is in contrast to other frameworks which don't let you kind of change the core models, which means changing the database schema effectively. They kind of use I think it's called an entity attribute value pattern, which is kind of bundling lots of key value pairs of metadata against your kind of core objects like orders and that kind of thing. And that's a well-known kind of pattern. And it works okay, but you're not really capturing the domain properly. You're just kind of bolting on your metadata to try and get it into the database. And it leads to quite ugly SQL queries, poor performance characteristics, and it's generally quite tricky to work with. And when you've got a store which might be long-lived, you might be developing on it for years and years, this is ultimately going to cause you to slow down, cause pain and sadness and other things like that. So Oscar tries to move away from that world by letting you model your domain accurately within your data structures. And when you get your data structures right, I think this has been picked up by kind of Linus Torvalds and other people about when you getting the data structures right is really important because they're like the foundations of your building. They let you build on top of them in kind of natural and that's the right way of saying it. It means other features and extensions come up kind of easily and naturally. You're not kind of fighting your own data structures under the hood. And that's something I'd come across before, maybe in this PHP framework that preceded Oscar, where you're trying to model a new domain, but you just find that the core data structures don't really capture it properly, and then you're constantly kind of having to put kind of hacks and bolt-ons and workarounds on top of it just to try and kind of shoehorn in the way your domain works into your software. So by domain-driven, it doesn't really follow everything that's in Eric Evans's book, but it's more about just making sure it models, or it's flexible enough to let you model your domain accurately.
As an example of the idea of having the right data structures being a boon to a project, I interviewed the creator of the Home Assistant project, and one of the things that he mentioned during that interview was the fact that he sort of chanced upon the right data structure and data format early on when he was developing the project so that he hasn't actually had to modify the core building block of it as it's continued to evolve and add a lot of new functionality. So I can definitely concur that having the right structure and format and semantics of your data from the start can be a huge benefit to the project overall, because it means you don't have to go back and refactor some of the original building blocks and try to figure out how that propagates back out through the rest of the project.
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
So what does the internal design and architecture of Oscar look like? And for somebody who wanted to get started with building a site with it or integrate it into an existing Django application, what would that process look like?
Michael, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. So basically, what I always tell people is Oscar is just a collection of Django applications. So you have the basket, the catalog, offers, you name it, voucher. So if you're just starting, you just run Oscar, of course. You integrate it in your Django project. And then when you need to add functionality, you fork one of those apps. So Oscar exists out of, I believe, around 10 apps. So if you want to customize your checkout flow, which is common, I believe, then you will fork that app with the management commando. And you just have a Django view with models which you can edit. So basically, that's it. I think people believe it's more difficult than it actually is. It's actually because it's, as I said, it's just Python, just Django models. There is some stuff like dynamic swappable models, which confuses people sometimes with the get underscore model and get underscore classes. So that may be the most important differentiator between regular Django apps. So if you understand that, then you can just go ahead, I believe. Yeah. I'm not sure. Perhaps also, David has more.
No, it does make sense. I think one of the ways that Oscar is designed is that it has this kind of dynamic loading or importing of other classes. So, in just regular Python, if you want to go and load some class, let's say it's a class that generates order numbers or something, you just be kind of from some module import, the class called order number generator. But because Oscar wants to let you customize the order number generator, just to run this example, it's not going to just use a regular Python kind of from somewhere import this statement. Instead, it's going to use a kind of we put a layer in front of it, effectively, a kind of dynamic loading layer, which kind of says, I want to load something called the order number generator, but I'm not going to tell you explicitly where it is. And so the dynamic loading can then go and look in several different places to go and find, this particular class. And if you haven't customized it, it'll just find the core one in Oscar. But Oscar lets you put your own one, inside your project, and it will find that one first. And that's the kind of trick that lets you kind of override and customize a subclass, actually any kind of component within the Oscar code base. And it's really not that different to kind of standard include path loading tricks you can do. Even just in Bash you can put a new folder at the front of your path environment variable, and Bash will find things there first before it goes and finds them in the more conventional places. It's really just an analog of that. But that is perhaps one of the most core decisions in Oscar, or core of the pieces of design that lets you override things.
Yeah, when I was reading through the documentation for the project and I came across that aspect of it, it sort of reminded me a little bit of maybe a lightweight dependency injection or inversion of control approach.
Yeah, that is kind of true. We didn't really want... you could have structured it where at the start of the project you have to configure or create some kind of configuration file that says explicitly where do I get all of these different things from. I guess... didn't go down that road just because there were an awful lot of these things. Let's say, and in any one particular store, you only wanted to override and customize kind of 10-20% of them. And so it kind of made more sense to kind of use the kind of, what's the right way of saying it, kind of opt-in approach. You just wanted to be explicit about the ones you did want to override, as opposed to having to specify all several hundred of them up front. So, yeah, that would be a perfectly viable alternative approach.
As we briefly discussed before, there can be a benefit to having an opinionated approach when building a framework because of the fact that it simplifies a lot of the implementation and design choices for the end user. So I'm wondering if you can expound a bit more on the reasoning for choosing to expose the internal complexity of the problem domain in the Oscar framework.
Well, I think for me, and the problems we were trying to solve, it was a necessity, really. We had clients that said, offers have to work this way. That's how we want to do them, or that's how our back-end systems do them. And we didn't really have the option of saying, actually, we'd like to consolidate on this one conventional approach and it's going to work for all our clients. That would have been brilliant, but it wasn't something that was going to work. So we had to kind of allow everything to be kind of customizable. And a lot of the kind of evolution of Oscar in the early days is we'd write an implementation of a feature driven by a particular client's requirements, and that would kind of make it into the framework. And then another client would come along and say, oh, no, we don't want offers to work that way, we have to work in this totally other way. And then we'd always have to do this kind of exercise of taking a step back and saying, okay, what's core between these two ways that these different clients want to do offers? Let's get that in Oscar and provide the hook points for each of them to then go and customize it. And in many ways, Oscar is the product of going through that iteration hundreds of times, of trying to marry requirements from different clients, see what's core, and see how you can then take a core thing and customize it in two different directions. That's quite a good exercise for writing flexible software. One of the problems one of the downsides, I suppose, of effectively allowing anything within any class or function or within the Oscar code base to be customized is it provides this enormous surface area, which is kind of like your API that you're giving to your open source community or your developers that are using Oscar. They can legitimately come and say, how does this class work? How do I use these methods? Oh, I've customized it in Oscar, version X, and now it's changed in version Y. How do I migrate between the two? It gives you enormous scope for getting kind of issues and pull requests that cover an awful, a lot of the surface area of the project. I find that in other open source libraries I've written, you can be very explicit about what the public API is for kind of clients of your package, of your module. But Oscar's quite different to that because developers can just reach in anywhere and start changing things within Oscar. That definitely makes it quite complicated. I found that since I don't get to work on Oscar in my day job, and I have a fairly full-on day job now at Octopus, and by the time I kind of got home and I put my kids to bed and eaten all that kind of stuff, and I think, maybe I'll look at some Oscar stuff tonight. But then when I open my laptop at kind of 10 p.m. and there's kind of I used to kind of read every email on the mailing list, but there's there used to be kind of 300 emails and hundreds of GitHub issues and pull requests on all kinds of topics within the e-commerce thing. I find it quite overwhelming these days. I really struggle. This is probably a common journey, but I struggle to kind of get the headspace almost to think about this enormous surface area that Oscar has. I feel quite guilty about that. I'd like to kind of do more. And actually just doing a bit of prep for this podcast, I was re-familiarising myself with the state of play and how things were, and reminding me what fun, how much I enjoyed working on Oscar when I could spend time in the day when I wasn't exhausted, frankly, to work on that. Reminded me that I'd actually quite like to get back into it. I digressed again enormously, but so what the point I was trying to make is by letting any part of it be customized, it creates this enormous surface area, but it was a necessity for the problems of the day that we were solving.
Playing on your point there about the amount of surface area that it exposes for the end user, I imagine that it also creates some maintenance challenges in terms of determining what features to accept and which ones to reject as far as pull requests from the community to make sure that you don't end up with too much feature bloat within the core framework that would not necessarily apply to the broadest set of use cases and is more specific to one person's particular requirements that they want to have embedded into the framework so that they don't necessarily have to re-implement it on their own.
I believe it's one of the downsides of Oscar, I believe. Downside is a big word, but because it's really flexible, most functionality you require, you can build yourself. I hear a lot of people are using it, a lot of companies are using it, but they don't really need to contribute it back because they can just plug it in themselves. But a good example is the promotions application in Oscar, which is not really that good. It tries to be a CMS, but it isn't. So the best way is to remove that and just say, okay, please use Wagtail, which is what I'm a fan of course, or use Django CMS. But it's difficult to just remove that, because then you need to go. Yeah, a lot of companies are using it actually. So that's what you mean, right? So
promotions is actually one of the things from Telshop. Actually, that's really. In retrospect, that actually shouldn't have been ported across, as you say. But sometimes once things have come in and they stick and people are using it, it's hard to get rid of them. That's one of the Telshop features from the book world. Which, as you say, now that we have Wagtail and all these other great features, the need for it to be an Oscar, isn't that pressing anymore. So.
Yeah. But I'm thinking about. A little bit about creating an Oscar 2.0. Like, okay, we can just remove some stuff and say, hey, it's a big new major version. One of the things I want to do is, like, for example, remove Django Haystack and just say, okay, we just support Elasticsearch. But that there's a lot of people will be, of course, don't like that because they are using Whoosh or Solar. But I believe to be more powerful in, for example, the searching or faceting on the e-commerce front, you just need to make a choice. Okay, are we going to use Haystack or are we going to use Elasticsearch? And those are some things I'm thinking about. Or a new design for the dashboard, which has a lot of impact because a lot of people already created custom views in the dashboard of Oscar with their custom applications. So that's difficult because it's used a lot, Oscar, I noticed. So.
Yeah. It is difficult when you're trying to make so many different people happy at the same time, and being more opinionated and saying, no, we only support one particular search backend or whatever is very appealing. I agree that it probably is the way to go, because Oscar does let you, if you don't want Elasticsearch, you can always just write your own search module and do your own thing. There's nothing stopping you. It's not like a bridge burning thing for other projects, but trying to walk that tightrope between providing enough flexibility for most people, but then not going crazy trying to make absolutely everybody happy. It's definitely a tricky one. I used to say when we were often having internal discussions about this kind of thing that with great flexibility comes great confusion. That just seems to come up quite a lot.
And on the front of community contribution, have you considered having a sort of community plugin site where people can go and see different extension modules that other people have written for specific problem domains that they could then pull into their own projects?
Michael, do you want to fill them?
Yeah, I'm not sure what you mean, actually. Sorry.
So, for instance, I don't know if you're familiar with the Kivy project, but it's a GUI framework, and they've started a part of their site called the Kivy Garden, where people have created their own modules that other people can then pull into their projects. So if there's a particular button widget that somebody wants to use but doesn't necessarily want to or know how to implement, they can just pull in something that somebody else has already done. So for Oscar, for instance, if somebody has created a particular implementation of coupons and they want to provide that for other people to use, basically exposing a way for them to have somewhere where they can list that so that other people can find it and pull it into their projects. Yeah,
so in the README there are a couple of projects, like, okay, look at this project, but it's not really maintained that well. For example, in the Wagtail community, you have I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but you have the awesome Wagtail wiki, where people just place their modules on with the description, categorized a bit. But we don't really have that, something like that. Perhaps Django packages.com might be usable for that, but no, not really. So one of the things I did do was recently to get the community a bit more active again, because it slowed down a bit. I started the Slack channel and I invited people who committed frequently to the Slack channel, giving commit access to people again. So you see a small uptick in the contributions again, which is, I think, the most recent big change is the Slack channel, which I think works better than ESA already. But that's the only thing we did recently for community. I'm not sure if David has any other remarks on this.
Not really. I think back when I was active in Oscar, we kind of, if someone told us about an extension, we kind of put it in the README of Oscar itself, and I think then we moved Oscar onto its own kind of GitHub organization. So I guess the next step would have been to bring it into this kind of umbrella organization. But we didn't have anything more than that, I don't think. in terms of kind of providing a community and a kind of discoverable place for Oscar extensions.
Yeah, a couple other approaches I've seen for curating that kind of list is, for instance, with SaltStack, they've got a separate organization for SaltStack formulas, and so users can request to have their repositories forked into that organization, or with Pelican, they've just got a repository that has a bunch of Git submodules for each of the different available extensions.
I think building a community is a lot of work. You need people that are good in it and enjoy that a lot.
Yeah, absolutely.
Personally, I'm not. If I invest time in Oscar, I try to do it with code instead of answering questions on the mailing list or stuff like that. So you need some people who in your community will like that, and we drive that.
Well, perhaps somebody listening to the show will decide to take up that mantle and help grow the community with you. What are some of the most interesting and unexpected uses of Oscar that you've seen built?
I was thinking about this before. I can't think of anything that was amazingly surprising. We used to, actually I'm not sure if we still do, have a kind of tracker pixel that would let us discover domains of people running Oscar sites. And this is all public, it was in the docs, very explicit about it. And every now and again, we used to go and have a look through all the different Oscar sites out there, and just the range of different e-commerce stores was always interesting. It's everything from your book sites, people selling makeup or DVDs or MP3s or underwear or plants, anything you can think of that's an online store for. Someone had an Oscar store for it somewhere. That was always quite interesting. One thing I guess when I was working at Tellingen, one direction we were thinking of taking Oscar in is we're talking to lots of clients who want to do ticketing and kind of booking like a tour at a museum between 9:30 and 10:30 on a particular day. So it's kind of concept of tying products to calendar dates and date times and that kind of thing. And it never came to be in the end, but that was an interesting direction that Oscar could quite naturally move towards. It wouldn't be that hard to modify, to take an Oscar project and kind of make it work with events and tickets and time slots and that kind of thing.
I know a company is already using it for hotel bookings, which says and stuff like that. They mostly use it with the Django Oscar API with the REST framework layer. And so, also, I know a couple of sites are using it behind the Sitecore environment, also using the API. So then Oscar is more used as a backend engine, e-commerce engine, than the front end. So that's also something that Oscar is, of course, pretty good in, I think.
That reminds me of another question that I had thought of a little while ago, is for somebody who is just starting a brand new Oscar site, is there an easy sort of one-shot command that has a bare-bones site visible, or is it largely up to the user to build their own templates?
Well, you can. I think the sandbox is the starting point, and you can just start it from the Git checkout. So if you clone the Django Oscar repository, it's basically just make sandbox, and you're good to go.
Yeah, because I know that sometimes for somebody who just wants to experiment with a project, not having something that they can start up and have something to look at, it can be somewhat discouraging and increases the barrier to entry enough that they decide to just move on to something else that does have something pretty that they can look at when they first launch it.
Yeah. Oscar does ship with a set of templates. I think they're bootstrap based, and you can, I think there is a command, start project or something, which will just create the skeleton structure you need, so you can start a little server and browse, the default, very vanilla-looking shop. So I think we do address that particular barrier issue. I think someone can actually go from zero to browsing some product pages in just a minute or so. But as Michael says, we also actually have some example Oscar shops in the repo, which are a bit more opinionated and will define some products and define how tax works and shipping and that kind of thing. So you can see what your project might be like after a few days' work by kind of browsing around the sandbox and seeing a more concrete example of Oscar where some customization has already taken place.
From your perspective, has the sort of domain of e-commerce changed or evolved since Oscar was first created, given that it started a few years ago and purchasing things online has become more and more ubiquitous? And if so, how has that impacted the evolution of Oscar itself?
From my point of view, my knowledge is as of end of 2014 really, it hadn't changed a great deal. We constantly tried to roll with the punches as we were building all these different client projects, but nothing fundamental in the kind of nature of e-commerce had really come about other than, as you say, just it becoming increasingly popular. And so I don't have anything profound to say on that particular point. I don't know if you do, Michael.
No, me neither. I think, Oscar hasn't changed much. I think after the last 2 years, it's mostly just upgrading it so that it supports the new Django versions. But no, I don't think e-commerce has changed much. I think perhaps, but I'm not. That may be country specific. But things like payments are a lot easier these days because you have a lot of payment providers, of course. Where you just say, okay, this needs to be paid, and you forward the client to the payment environment, and they just do their thing, and you then don't really care as the implementer.
I think that's a natural trajectory for Oscar. Its future isn't to add loads more features into the core framework. The way it changes is to make it more flexible. And that often means, as we touched on before, with this kind of promotions component with it, is sometimes stripping things out, so like removing the bits that aren't that flexible or have been replaced by better alternatives, and just turning Oscar into this kind of lump of clay that can be moulded into any shape. Often the work is often just kind of tweaking internal APIs to make things more flexible and adding new hook points. I think that's the way that Oscar will evolve. In terms of new features and supporting Bitcoin and all kinds of other things from the general e-commerce ecosystem, that would come in its plugins and extensions, like extra things that you can mix together with Oscar quickly, to get a project up and running in a small amount of time.
And I think one of the big changes for me developing Oscar these days is combining it with Wagtail. Both use the same underlying technology in using Treebird as the base for the models, and that combines really well. And we created a package for it for a client to integrate it, and clients like it a lot because they can just select products in Wagtail and do the checkout in Oscar. And I think that is, if you want to CMS use it in combination with Oscar, then just look at Wagtail.
Yeah, Wagtail is definitely a pretty well put together CMS, and it's one that we're actually using at my job. And for listeners who are interested, there is an interview that I did with one of the creators of Wagtail, so I'll link that in the show notes as well. So are there any topics of conversation that we didn't cover that you think we should have?
I can't think of anything else to do with Oscar specifically.
No, me neither. Yeah, we're always looking for contributors. Pull requests and people who want to review the pull request. I think a lot of people are using it but don't contribute it back yet. So I hope that can be improved. Basically that.
All right. Well, for anybody who wants to follow either of you and get in touch, I'll have you guys send me your contact information. I'll put that in the show notes. And with that, I'll bring us to the picks. I'll pass it to you, David. What do you have for picks?
Okay, so one thing that has really changed the way I program, that I've only picked up in the last 6 months or so is, I'm a keen TDD advocate and try and write things that way all the time, but I recently subscribed to Gary Bernhardt's Destroy All Software screencasts. I don't know if that's been a pick before, but highly recommend those in terms of terse kind of 10-minute screencasts on various aspects, but a lot of things I'm interested in, like writing tests, structuring code, like software design, Unix, Git, these kind of things. And actually, the thing I wanted to call out, which a practice I've picked up from watching those, is using your editor to map some keyboard shortcut that immediately runs the test that the cursor is on at the moment. And so I'm a Vim user, so I map kind of leader T, which is comma T on my in my preferences, to run the particular unit test that the cursor is under, and then it remembers that test. And whenever you go and change your application code, you can do comma T again, and it runs that same test again. And that tiny keyboard shortcut thing that doesn't sound that consequential has actually had an enormous difference because it lets you do get that cycle of that TDD cycle from kind of writing a failing test and fixing it or rerunning the test to a really small amount of time, kind of fractions of a second. And I used to do this extremely labour-intensive process where I'd like do Command Tab and switch to another terminal window, and then do Control P to select the previous command and run that. But this is like an order of magnitude faster than that, and it makes a huge difference. Sometimes these small changes in making something slightly faster can have a really surprisingly large effect.
The idea of keeping your tools sharp is one that's definitely important in any discipline, but particularly in software engineering as well, because of the compounding factors that it can bring into play in terms of increased efficiency and increased satisfaction.
Yeah, I'm an absolute geek for that kind of stuff, productivity improvements and fiddling with your bash RC and your read line config. And I used to joke that at my funeral I just want my Vim RC redundant. It's not really a joke.
Michael, what do you have for picks?
So, I can continue on that a bit. For my current journey is actually switching from PIM to PyCharm. So, which is, I'm the same as that is in David. I'm just trying to be more productive when I'm working. So, switching PyCharm, I'm not sure yet if I will continue using it because I miss Vim sometimes. But it's a great editor, especially with the latest version. Furthermore, I did last year a lot of my open source work actually went to other projects than Oscar. I created a SOAP library because that's something I wanted to do for years, because I was always frustrated when I was required to use a SOAP service. So that might be interesting for people to look at. It's called the ZAPE project. I think it's great, of course.
How do you spell that, sorry, Michael?
ZAPE, Z-E-E-P.
Ah, yes, we're using that at Octopus. It's in our code base. I didn't know that was by you. That's good to know.
So I worked on that the last year, and it's actually really fun to work on because it's not web development. It's purely making something that's compatible with a lot of old incompatible software. You get a lot of weird bug reports, of course, because hey, why doesn't this work with my SOAP server from 10 years ago? But that makes it fun to do, actually, a bit of puzzling. So that's one of the other things I was working on.
Yeah, that's good to know about, because a lot of the other SOAP libraries that are available for Python have been sort of unmaintained and are starting to show their age. So it's interesting to see a new entrant to that area, particularly given the fact that SOAP is so widely reviled and yet still fairly widely used, particularly for older or larger companies.
Yeah, especially in .NET, it's of course really simple to just create a SOAP endpoint for an existing application. It's like 2 clicks and you have it running. So in Europe, it's still used a lot.
Well, I appreciate the both of you taking time out of your day to join me and talk to some more about Oscar. Definitely sounds like a very interesting project and one that I hope to have a use case for in the future. And hopefully this will give you some exposure and get some more contributors. So I appreciate that, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your days.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks
You too.